Hey everybody, this is Laurie Meyer from stampedgreetings.com, and today I want to show you how to make a very fun, I'm calling it kind of a torn stenciled background one layer card. This is all one layer and it is a really fun technique. I do have to give credit where credit is due. I watched a recent video that Gina K had posted on her YouTube channel and took the ideas and made a little modifications here and there, but the inspiration for this card came from Gina K. So wanted to thank her for that. I'm going to jump in and just start. You're going to need 3 pieces of paper if you want to make something similar. And those 3 pieces are going to be for the card itself. The card base is a piece of basic white. Get this out of the way so we can see the card a little bit better. And it's the traditional A2 size, which means it is 8.5 by 5.5, scored at 4.25 on the 8.5 side and then folded. So it's a regular A2 size. I also have a piece of basic black. And for me, that is going to be the color that I'm going to use as the frame behind the focal point. And I cut that just a little bit smaller than the card base itself, which means that this measures 4 1/8 by 5 3/8. So it's just 1/8 shorter on the width and the height of the cardstock, of the card base. So again, this is 4 1/8 by 5 3/8. And then there's one more piece that is going to be used to make our focal point. And eventually that is going to go right on the top. And you can see that we're doing concentric rectangles. And it means that this piece, which is also basic white, is just a little bit smaller than the basic black. It measures 5 1/4 by 4. Again, that's 5 1/4 by 4. I am going to spend the vast majority of the time working on the focal point, because when we're done with that, we're simply going to layer these pieces together. So there's nothing that I really need to focus on these two. And I'm going to start with the piece, again, that measures 5 1/4 by 4. What we're going to create first is the background, the piece that looks like it's torn on the edges. And you can see how it looks like it's torn. And we also have this really pretty two-tone green plaid that's going on in the background as well. So the way we're going to start this is we need to make sure that this piece is secure, because eventually, once we get a couple of things situated, I'm going to be using a blending brush, and I'm going to be moving that blending brush over this piece, and I don't want it to move. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab just a little bit of washi tape, just a couple of short pieces. I always put washi tape on the back of my hand, and I do that because I'm trying to get some of the tack off. I just want to make sure that it's not overly sticky and that it won't tear my paper. Now I'm going to be putting a mask on the top and the bottom of this card. So the top and the bottom are great places to just tack this down because they're going to be covered. So right at the top, I'm going to put a little piece of washi tape, and then down at the bottom, I'm going to do the same thing. Okay. And I'm actually going to back up one step, which is fine because this is not tacky, so I can lift it straight up. If you want to have a piece of grid paper or something underneath to get your design as straight as you can, see how those lines that I made using the stencil are pretty straight? I actually put a grid paper behind, and I forgot to put that down. Sorry about that. So this is a piece of grid paper that I took out of my Stamparatus. And it's a really nice size. It's not really big. You don't need this. If you want to eyeball it, you're going to be fine. But I'm just going to go ahead, and it does not matter where you put the washi tape on this because it's going to be way, way out of the way. So what we're doing here is I'm just getting that grid paper down, and I'm going to now go back. Got a little bit ahead of myself there. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to put this piece of paper, this is the focal point, I'm going to put that right onto that grid paper. And I'm just picking a line. It doesn't matter what line it is. I'm just going to put that right, that edge, that left edge is going to be straight against one of the lines on the grid paper. And again, you don't need the grid paper if you don't want to use it. It will be perfectly fine. All right, so we're starting to get our layers together. Another thing that I suggest that you have is a piece of either copier paper or a piece of scrap cardstock. And you're going to want this to be 5.5 by 4.25. That's the standard size of an A2 card. And what we're going to do with this is we're going to tear it in half, and we're going to use half of it on the top as a mask and half of it on the bottom as a mask. And it's up to you. You can use scrap paper, you can use copier paper, you can use anything you want. And all you're going to do is tear that right in half. And that is going to be a mask that is going to allow you to have a really nice torn edge. That's what is going to produce this torn look at the edge of the stencil. And what I'm doing is I'm just putting that on top of the paper. And the reason I wanted the piece of copy paper or whatever you're using, I want it to be 5.5 inches wide. Our focal point is 5.25. I want this to be a little bit wider so that I'm sure that I'm going to get that torn edge all the way to the edge of that focal point piece. And again, we're going to use a little bit of washi and we're going to tack that down. So I'm just putting this, and I can see how you can see where the top of the focal point piece is, right where I've got my finger. You can actually see where that piece of washi tape is. So it looks like it's about 1 inch or so from the top. I'm just going to tack that down and tack it on the other side. I will be able to reuse the washi, which is really nice because I don't like to waste supplies. And I also find that washi tape seems to last forever and ever. Then I'm going to take the other piece, and don't worry about matching up the tear lines. It really doesn't matter. But what I am going to look at is I can see about how much room I have on the bottom from the edge of that paper. And I'm going to try to get it about the same as the top. But again, it's really not going to matter a whole heck of a lot. And all we're doing here is we're masking off that focal point. So I'm just putting a little bit more washi. And again, we're going to be able to use all of this washi on another card. So this is not going to waste. So now you can see how that torn edge is on the top and the bottom. That again is going to allow us to have this really cool torn edge effect on the top and the bottom. So now what we need to do is we need to figure out what stencil or stencils we're going to use to create the pattern. There is a really nice set of stencils. I call them stencils. I apologize if this is confusing to you because many people call these masks. Before I became a stamper, I did a lot of stenciling. I actually belonged to an organization out in Houston, Texas. And a friend of mine and I took a lot of stenciling classes, and I really got into it. It was a lot of fun. But I'm going to be using the Artistic Mix Decorative Masks. And they're fun. They're in the annual catalog. They actually come with 2 masks that correspond with shapes that are on one of the masks in the set. So you can even use these over a sentiment or over another area when you're masking, or you can do the opposite on that particular mask. And then what we have in the rest of the package are sort of two steps. These two work together. Let me get this out of the way so you can see that a little bit better. These two pretty masks work together. And the other two that come in the package are these two, and these work together incredibly well. You can use them alone, you can put them together. I'm going to be putting them together eventually. But the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to use the larger openings, and that is going to be what I am going to use my blending brush to put in first. And what I'm doing, the only thing that I'm being a little careful about on this is if I look at the edge of my paper. So I'm actually looking at the edge of the focal point. I want to try to get the design to be kind of centered on the edge. So you can see there's a little bit of the card showing right in that rectangle. Same thing over here. And I'm just gonna kind of line that up as best as I can. I can also use my grid paper to see that that's pretty square. And again, I know this looks like a lot of washi tape, and I've already said this 1,000 times, so you're probably tired of me saying it, but I will be able to use the washi tape again. It's not going to go to waste. And I'm just going to tack that down. And then we're going to start with our blending. The color that I used as the primary color in the blending that I did is Soft Succulent. And that's actually the only green that I used on here. There are two intensities, and you'll see that as we make this. So I'm going to take my Soft Succulent ink pad and just open that up and get it positioned. It's going to be a little bit off camera. You're just going to have to trust me that it's up there. And get out my blending brush. And I'm just going to work in some of that ink into the blending brush. And what you will find with these, if you haven't used them, is the more that you use a brush with a color ink, the more that ink is going to be saturating the brush, and you'll get a deeper and deeper color as you go. If you wash your brushes like I do, it may take just a minute or so to get that ink to start saturating, but it will. And I'm just going to come in and I'm going to do some little swirls. I'm concentrating on the areas between where the tear lines are. So you can see those starting to come to life, and also the sides of my paper. And I'm just going to continue to add color. Blending ink to me is super relaxing. It is so much fun because as you are doing this, at least for me, it's always a magical sort of event when you take everything off and you see what you've created. Because right now, looking at this, it looks like a little mess. We've got washi tape and more washi tape and even more washi tape. And we've got a stencil and grid paper. But when we're done and we take the mask or stencil, if you want to call it a stencil, when we take that off and reveal what is underneath, it is magical. It's almost like using embossing powder, and I never get tired of that. Heat embossing will always, always simply fascinate me, and I never get sick of it. And stenciling like this, I don't get tired of either. I honestly think that stencils are a tool that we don't use enough, that are super easy, incredibly versatile, very portable, and just give some amazing effects when we're done. Now I'm almost there. Going to do just a little bit more on this side, just because I want to make sure the colors are kind of balanced. And I'm going to say that I'm good. All right. So what we've done when we look at this card is we've added one layer. We've added the large squares, right? So here's a large square. This is a large square. Now what we need to do is add the smaller piece of that design. And what's really neat about these stencils is they overlay each other. So if I look at the top corner and bottom corner and I align the piece that corresponds with this one and just put it right on the top, what it does is you can see it creates that really nice plaid. So you know where I'm going. I'm getting washi tape. Yep, more washi tape. Just when you thought you can need or want more washi tape, well, we do, because we're going to stick this right on the top. And I know that I'm not going to be putting ink on the top or the bottom. And I'm also not wanting to layer a bunch of pieces of washi tape one on top of the other, because then it's going to get hard to take apart. But I've layered those together. And let me just show you before I start putting ink on that, how the other two masks that come in the set work. Similar to the large rectangles, you have a large opening of kind of a filigree pattern. And then when you put the other stencil right on the top, that filigree gets put together. Obviously, these two can be used separately, as can the two that I'm using right now. And all I'm going to do here is I'm going to go back in with the same ink, and I'm going to go over the same area. And I am going to hold that down just a little bit because I definitely don't want it moving around. I could put more washi on it, but I can also put my hand on top of the area where I am blending my ink. Get that off there a little bit so you can see a little bit better what I'm doing. It's very hard to figure out lighting. And now that I have a shiny stencil, let's see if this is good enough. That's going to be good enough. It's probably less obnoxious. Yeah, lighting is a very big challenge for me. I find when I have stamp cases that are plastic and shiny, or in this case, a stencil that is plastic and shiny, it can be very difficult to get a contrast in the way that I want. So I'm going over, as you can see, and I really want to make sure that I get a nice layer of the soft succulent over the initial layer. But because I have a more intricate stencil, there are going to be some areas that only have the first generation of the ink that we put down just a minute ago. All right, I think we're about there. I could peek, because I could peek and then put it all back together, but I'm not going to do that. All right, so there we go. So here's the fun. Here's the reveal. The first thing we're going to do is take off the top stencil. And grab that washi so I can use it again. Ooh. Take off the bottom part. Put that over to the side. One suggestion, whenever you take a stencil off and you're moving it around, know what side has the ink. It's just important. So what I try to do is I leave the washi tape on, and that's my visual indicator that this side has ink on it. So I'm just going to put that over to the side. How do I know that? Well, experience, because I have done some oops with stencils before. So again, I know that this side, the side that's facing me, is the side that has ink. And I'm going to put that over to the side. Now, I'm not going to pull the other masks off just yet. I want to do a little bit of blending, and it's really kind of hard to see that on the finished card. But if I do a little bit more right at that torn edge on the front, on the top, and the bottom, it's going to make that look a little more defined. And it will make it look a little more defined, especially where there's almost a white, because that's where we had the initial mask. And that mask was shaped like this. So when we put this on the white cardstock, anywhere that we have this thick plastic piece, that's going to show white. And what I want is, when I'm done with this, I want to have a torn edge that looks like it's torn all the way across. So I'm just going to come back in, bring in a little bit more of my ink, and I'm going right along where that torn edge is, because I really want that torn edge to be defined and look like it's torn all the way across. Now, there are many different masks, stencils that have cool patterns that are not patterns that are up and down or horizontal, and you can add color. So what I'm doing now, where I'm going back in and adding the same color that I used, you could actually take a complementary color to one that you've used on the base of your stencil and do the edge. And that way you're going to, add even more interest. Just be sure that if you do a complementary color, that it really is a complementary color and that it's not going to make a muddy mess. And that's pretty easy to do. You can actually blend the colors before you get them onto your stencil just to see what they're going to do. All right, I think I am just about there. Now, this is the really fun part. I know you're as excited as I am, because this is where I hope, at least to yourself, you say, "Ooh, ooh," just like that. Isn't that pretty? It is really cool. And then I'm going to take this mask off. And like I told you, you'll be able to use the washi on another project. But that is just so, so cool. It is so awesome and so fun. And if I take this completely off, you're going to see how pretty that is. It has a lot of depth. It has a really, really fun pattern. The two tones of the green. And because we went back after pulling those stencils off and just went right around the edge, you can see that it really looks like it's torn. It's super, super cool. So the last things that we're going to do before we put this card together, we're going to do a little bit of stamping. And the sky is the limit. I'm going to get this out of my way. I will turn on the light just so we can see it a little bit better. But isn't that gorgeous? And I'm going to finish this card off with a couple of stamps from the Merriest Moments stamp set. I cheated. I have them already set up in my Stamparatus. And I'm going to do a couple of poinsettias. I love these. They are whimsical, not symmetrical, super easy to use. You can tell I've used that set a few times since on this grid paper. You can see some of the images. And what I'm going to do is I'm just positioning this where I want it to kind of be. I'm intentionally going to put the poinsettias so that they're over the edges of what I just created, because I think that looks really cool. And I'm going to use a very deep red. I'm using Mary Merlot, and actually one of the ink spots that probably came in a paper pumpkin kit a little while ago. I had a really good time the other day. I got out all my ink spots. I have a ton from paper pumpkin kits, and I decided that I wanted to organize them so that I would have the colors, the color families kind of together, so that I would be able to just grab some ink spots and use those if I needed to have an ink from the current color families that Stampin' Up! Has. And I'm just going to go over that one more time. When you do this, when you stamp over what you have stenciled, a couple of things to keep in mind. One is that you definitely want to use a color that will cover up the colors that you've used on your stencils. So for example, a color that will likely work 99% of the time is a black, because that is going to do a great job of covering up the image of the underlying stencil. And I purposely chose the Mary Merlot because it is dark and rich enough that when I stamp it on top of the soft succulent, and you can tell I'm putting layers of this because I really, really, really want to saturate that color. And using the Stamparatus is very helpful in doing that. And then I'm going to do one where I've got one of the flowers way off on the side, but I'm going to be pretty safe that the ink is going to cover what I want. I'm just moving those magnets out of the way so that they're close enough that they're going to help me keep the paper where I want it to be. What's also nice about the Stamparatus and using it this way is you can reposition your paper. Leave the stamps that you have all set. Just reposition your paper however you want that to be. And your designs are going to look very different because the poinsettias are actually upside down from the way that I used them before. So I'm just going to go ahead and add a couple more layers of ink to this and then stamp my sentiment, and then we'll be able to put everything together. So as you're looking at this kind of project, think about the stencils or the masks that you have in your stash, because you can use probably any of them at all to do this kind of stamping. And I really encourage you to take a look at what you have. In a minute, I'm going to show you an alternative. If you don't have a lot of masks, you have other tools that you can use to create a similar design. And again, I did cheat. I apologize, but I did put my sentiment in the Stamparatus, and I'll show you in just a second what it is. And I'm going to put that right down in the bottom right. It is Merry Christmas. And I decided that I wanted to use the Merry Christmas stamp from the Christmas Scotty stamp set. It's just really cute. And I also wanted to use a little different green. I wanted to make it darker. So I pulled out my Evening Evergreen. Love this color. And that darker green is going to pair very, very well with the black frame that I'm going to put around this piece. So just inking that up one more time. And it's a fun script. What's also nice about it is it doesn't have to be perfectly straight to look good. All right, we are almost done with our stamping. The only other thing I'm going to do is add a little bit of color to the middle of my poinsettias. There's a really pretty stamp in the Merriest Moment. It's just this little grungy one. And I've got a very small block. I'm using Mango Melody because it's a nice bright yellow orange. And I'm just going to come in and I may have to stick my head in here and get a nice bit of pop. So pardon my head here. I just want that to really show up. I tried a couple of other yellows and they were not bright enough for what I wanted. But that Mango Melody is absolutely perfect. Okay, we're almost done. So the last pieces that we need to do, or the last things we need to do to pull this all together, we just need to do some gluing. And we're going to get our pieces and put them together. And I am searching. This is silly. Does this happen to you? You have a couple of pieces of paper. Here we go. And they walk away. It doesn't matter if they're the only thing on the desk. They will just walk away. Happens all the time. I was at a yoga class yesterday at the Y, and I was getting all of my stuff out, and I started laughing because I was putting on the little shoe, sock things that I have that have the adhesive bottoms that grip. And I looked over and there was a piece of the dimensional backing that was on the floor. And I literally started laughing. I just thought it was hysterical that I had brought a piece of dimensionals to the Y. And I was a little bit embarrassed, but nobody saw it, so that was okay. So I'm just adding that black piece on the back. I'm going to add our focal point. And then the only thing I have left after I do this to finish off this card is put a little bit of bling. Now, to me, one layer cards like this that are really interesting and look like they are multi-layers simply because of the way they're designed are very, very fun to share. I think when people get something like this and they look at it and they look at the background and they think about, how would somebody have created that, it gives them pause to think. So one layer cards, I find, can be even more challenging sometimes than to make a multi-layered card. To finish this off, I'm just going to put a couple of little gems. I really like these champagne rhinestones. They have a pop of color and they go really well with a lot of other colors. They seem to blend and match and just work incredibly well with many different colors. So I've been using these quite a bit. And I am literally mimicking the way that I put the gems on the example, which is why I'm doing this fairly quickly. Usually takes me a minute or two to figure out where I want the gems to be. But on these cards, what I wanted to do is I wanted to bring the eye to a couple of different places where the tear lines are, where some of the poinsettias are, and just kind of doing the odd number. So there are 5 on those cards. So I did mention that I wanted to give you an idea of how to make a similar card, but using different materials. This was made with, a die cutout versus a stencil. And it was really, really fun and really easy to do. And what I did is I used one of the dies that is in the split card texture dies. These are the ones that look like this. And I actually cut out a die. And you can see that when I cut this out, I left a good piece of paper, a good width all the way around. This became my mask, my stencil. And it's kind of neat because it already looks like it's torn. So I put that on a piece of soft succulent. And what I decided to do, which was really fun, is this was just, an experiment to see if it would work. I got out some of my Stampin' Spots. I used, crumb cake. I used early espresso. I used evening evergreen. And what I did is I took my Stampin' Spots and I just inked over the top of this and filled it in rather than doing the ink blending. And it's a really cool effect. It's kind of neat the way that there's concentration of different hues of the ink that come into play. I trimmed the front piece down just a little bit when I got done with the stenciling. I added in the Happy and Birthday from The Biggest Wish. I love that set. I've used it a lot. And then I wanted just a little hint of texture on the front. I think you can see that a little bit. And to do that, I used the Time Worn Type 3D embossing folder and just ran that front piece through. And then it was super easy to put this together. Piece of early espresso in the back, the focal point up on some dimensionals, and then a couple of gems around the side. So if you don't have stencils, or if you want to check your stash to see if you have some dies that could work for you to do this kind of technique, check it out, because I bet you do. But either way, I really hope that you will try this technique. I think you will enjoy it. The possibilities are endless, and it's really a lot of fun. So when you do, share what you make. I'd love to see it. And until next time, happy stamping.